Hi, I'm Steph Mischuk and welcome to Killer PHP. In this video tutorial, we're going to look at a basic capability or construct in PHP, something called the conditional statement. So that's, conditional statement is nerd gibberish for making decisions. So what do I mean by that? Essentially, a conditional statement is something that allows you to make decisions in PHP. The most basic of the conditional statements is the so-called if statement. Well, so-called. It's the if statement. And essentially what it does, it allows you to check to see if something is true or false. And then thereby this allows you to control how your PHP scripts run. So with all that nerd gibberish said, let's actually just write some code and we'll get a first-hand look at what we're talking about here. So an if statement starts with the word if. Then you do a couple brackets, and then you include a couple curly brackets. So what we're going to do is we'll just do something simple. If 1 is less than 3, and we're going to echo out some text. Okay, so this admittedly is not very exciting, but I'm trying to teach you guys some theory here, so bear with me. All right, so this is a basic structure of an if statement. Essentially, in the first set of brackets here, you have the thing that you're evaluating. So essentially, what we're doing here inside these brackets is checking to see whatever's in these brackets will result in a true statement. So what I'm trying to think of a best way to explain this to you in a non-nerd term. So let's just get into this example, and hopefully it will start to clear up for you. So for instance, with this example, I'm just using a simple mathematical statement here. I'm checking to see if 1 is actually less than 3. In human terms, you can say, well, is this yes, true, or false? And of course, this is true. So if we look down here, we have our curly brackets opening and closing, and we've just echoed out the text, yes, it is. So essentially, what's happening here is that if whatever's in here is true, whatever you code you type in between the curly brackets will be processed by the PHP script. So in this case, if this is true, then we're telling PHP to echo out to the page, yes it is. So let's check our page. And yes it is, comes up. And so we know indeed that 1 is less than 3. So if we turn this around and we say, we're asking now, is 1 greater than 3? And we go back to our PHP page, refresh, and you see nothing prints out. That's because, 1 is actually not greater than 3. So this is the basic structure of an if statement. Again, you have your first set of brackets. Inside the set, you have the thing that you want to check to see whether or not it's true or false. And if it is true, whatever is in between these two curly brackets here will be printed out. If it's false, it will just skip this and go on its merry way. If you remember from our first PHP video tutorials, PHP scripts, like HTML pages in general, are processed from the top down. So the script starts reading here, it starts going down, so on. So when it hits an if statement, you're basically throwing a question to PHP, and depending on the answer, true or false, it will print out this stuff here or not. If statements are not limited to just mathematical equations, that would be kind of boring. We could also do things like check to see, well, we can compare strings of text, for instance. So let's say we create a variable name equals, and we'll give it a value of Stefan, well, just Steph, and we'll create another variable. Okay, oops, another name, and we'll give it a value of Nick. So what we want to do now is use our if condition here to check to see whether or not the variable name is actually equal to the variable another name. So we're going to learn something a little bit new here. Oops, not plus plus. So what we're doing here is we're comparing this variable to see if it's equal to this variable here. Now look at this operator. Now it's not the single equals, it's not this, it's the double equals. Now we learned that the single equals actually inserts values into variables, right? That's the assignment operator. And this is called the equality operator. And what it does is basically you're telling PHP with this symbol to check to see if this is equal to this. So what we're actually, and we're not talking about the variable name, but we're talking about the contents of the variable. So we want to know whether or not Steph is equal to Nick. PHP is smart enough. There's many different ways. Let me back up 2 steps here. In different languages, you could look at this. They could compare this in so many different ways. But in PHP, it's smart enough to know that we're just comparing to see whether or not the text is equal to each other. So let's we save this, and we're going to see what PHP tells us. And we get nothing because PHP knows that, of course, name is not equal to another name. If we change this to Steph, oops, we just save that, and we refresh our page, and we see, yep, Steph is actually equal to Steph. So we've learned a couple of things here so far. We've learned that the if statement can compare, basically always evaluates the true or false rather. So this evaluates the true because Steph is indeed equal to Steph, right? The value. And when it was Nick, it was false. So because Steph is not equal to Nick, and because it was false, we didn't get this statement here printed out. The next thing I want to cover is a little addition to the if statement, something called else. So I'm just going to type in else. And again, you just type in else, 2 curly brackets. And again, we're just going to echo out some text just to make our lives a little bit easier. So we've introduced you now to the else, I guess we'll call it block within an if statement. So let me just read this out for you. So first we're checking to see if this is true, print what's in here. Else, or you might think of otherwise, print this, which is in between another set of curly brackets. So we're checking, again, we're always checking to see whether this statement here is true or false. In this case, with the else, we're basically telling PHP to basically do something if the condition turns out to be false, if this turns out to be false. So let's save this. Remember, Steph isn't, and we have Steph here, Nick. So if everything works out, this should print out. So let's see what happens. There we go. No, it is not. We've learned about the if statement. We learned that this is always checking to see if this is true or false. And we learned that after the if statement comes with, you got the first set of brackets, then you have your curly brackets, and you know that if it is true, what's in between the first set of curly brackets is actually processed. You're not just limited rather to just printing out text to the page. You could run other scripts in here. You could call other functions. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can do anything you'd want to do within this block here. And then finally, we've learned the else clause, which allows you to basically tell PHP to take an action if this turns out to be false, if this evaluates to false. Okay, let's move along with our if statement. Let's look at something a little extra about if. We can do something called else if. Now, else if allows you to check another condition, and or another statement. This would be condition 1, and we can check another condition. So let's go back to our original condition, see if we see if 1 is less than 4. Actually, it was 3, but who cares? And so what happens here? How does this work now? So first we check to see if this is true or false, if this condition is true or false. If it's true, we print out whatever's in the first set of brackets. If it's not true, else if will be run. So basically it says, if this is true, do this. Else, if this is true, do this. Again, with the else if, which comes after your first if statement, it evaluates to see with whatever's in between these brackets here, it checks to see whether it's true. If it is true, it does whatever code you have inside, in between these curly brackets here. Finally, you could end this off with another else statement where you notice we don't have these two brackets here. We have the curly brackets, and basically the else statement will run if this first condition is false and this first condition is false. All right, so let's just run this very quickly and see what happens. So we get not is not. That's not very exciting. So basically, this evaluates to true. So we say numbers are true, just so we see something different and exciting on the page. So, and we'll just reverse this just to make the point. Nothing is true. So we've pretty much covered the basics of the if statement. We understand the ifs. We're always checking to see if this is true or false. That's the key of it. Understand that when you're using an if statement, you're checking to see that whatever's in these brackets, whether or not it's true or false. If it's true, it will run whatever code's in the first set of brackets. If you have an if-else statement afterwards, again, it runs just like the first if statement. It runs only if this turns out to be false. It will drop down to else if, and it will check that. If this turns out to be true, it will run whatever's in the curly braces. Otherwise, if there is an else statement afterwards, it will run the else. This may be confusing for some of you now, but it's very important that you understand this stuff, because this is how you control your scripts, really. And I would suggest that you just play around with the if and the if and the else statements and just see how it goes. One thing I want to point out, though, is that you notice how we have semicolons here to end these statements, but we don't have them here in our if statements. With the if statements, because you got the brackets coming in afterwards, you do not end this with curly with a semicolon. If you put a semicolon there, you try to run that, it should generate an error for us. Parse in syntax error unexpected TES. So anyway, line 21. So we know that we shouldn't have, it said line 21 if you notice up here. That's because it got screwed up by this. So you just got to make sure you have no semicolon after your if statements. That's an exception to the semicolon rule that we discussed in earlier videos. So there we go. We've covered our basic conditional statements here. There are other things that PHP has in terms of making decisions, but we'll have to leave those to other videos.